It's summertime, we're all spending more time outside, and we're also starting to think about how the sun is affecting our skin. So with this in mind, I'm going to do a 3-part video series about how the sun affects our skin and what we can do about it. So part 1 is going to be how the sun causes damage to our skin, and we're going to talk primarily about UV rays and reactive oxygen species. Part 2 and 3 are going to be about what we can do to protect ourselves. And so we're going to talk about sunscreens, the 2 main kinds of sunscreens that are available on the market and what the pros and cons of each are, and antioxidants. Welcome back to Erin's Beauty Bloom. This is part 1, and then we're going to talk about UV rays. So we all know that UV rays cause damage to our skin, but if you're like me, when it comes to the actual mechanics, things get really fuzzy really fast. It's important to at least attempt to understand how UV rays are affecting the skin, because it will allow us to make better choices about what sunscreen to use or how to protect ourselves. So if you don't want to miss anything in the future, hit subscribe right now so you can find out how to protect yourself from UV rays. So one of the primary differences between UV rays and the visible light that we can see as humans is the length of the waves. UV rays have shorter waves than the light that's visible to us. And although we can't see it, there are some insects like bees that can see UV rays. On the spectrum of light, UV rays exist between the visible light that humans can see and X-rays. And we've known about UV rays since about 1800, so a long time. There are 3 types of UV rays, A, B, and C. So UVC we don't hear a lot about because it is completely filtered out by our atmosphere. So the remainder of this video we're going to focus on what they call broad spectrum UV, which is the combination of UVB and UVA. Now, even though it has traveled all the way from the sun, through our atmosphere, and down to where we are on the surface of the earth, it is still really strong and can cause damage to our cells. But how do UV rays cause damage to our cells? They have enough energy to break chemical bonds. And what happens when they break these chemical bonds is it causes electrons to break away from atoms, and depending on the specifics of that interaction, it can be called oxidation, ionization, or reduction. But either way, it's the process that turns the oxygen molecule into ROS, or reactive oxygen species. Oxygen molecules are at risk for this because they have 2 unpaired electrons. And when those electrons are impacted by UV rays and the chemical bond is broken, they can transfer. And what that does is it changes the chemical properties of the atom, and as they go on to interact with other atoms, it causes changes, either forming or breaking of chemical bonds that it otherwise would not. There are benefits and drawbacks to this. One benefit would be if you have like a bad smell or a stain in something, you can put it out in the sun and you'll sun bleach it, is kind of the colloquial term that we use for that. And what happens when you do that? You put it out in the sun, and the UV rays starts to impact the oxygen around and in contact with whatever material it was that you set out there. You put it in the sun, and now the electrons have started to move around. They're breaking bonds, they're forming new bonds, and in the meantime, that can destroy the smell or the stain. This is especially true if you've ever used cloth diapers or known somebody who's used cloth diapers for their child. They'll frequently hang them in the sun to dry to eliminate any kind of smell and stains, which is great. But the drawback is the same process occurs on whatever material UV rays interact with, even if there is no smell or no stain. So on our bodies, we do have a natural oxidant defense, and we're able to tolerate some exposure. So we all like a nice suntan. Those of us with less melanin are jealous and we want to be darker, so we spend time in the sun. Consider a suntan your warning and your natural defense. You're in the sun. Once you've started to reach the limits of the natural oxidant defense, that means that reactive oxygen species are starting to cause damage to the cells. The body senses this, and what it does is it produces melanin and sends it to the surrounding cells, and this causes the skin to darken, and you get a suntan. This means that a tan is not no damage, but it should be considered minimal damage or reversible damage. And it's also important to remember that if you have more melanin in your skin, that does not mean that you will not get a sunburn. It just means that you have a higher natural defense. If it doesn't matter what your skin tone is, if you continue to be exposed to reactive oxygen species after your body has sent that melanin response, you will get a sunburn. This is overexposure, and you've exceeded your natural defenses, and this includes the creation of melanin, which is our natural defense against sun exposure. And now the UV rays can actually damage the DNA of your cells because there is nothing to neutralize those electrons that are flying all over the place. Once your body senses this, it results in inflammation, and that's what we call a sunburn. And interestingly enough, while I was researching this, I learned that the redness that we typically associate with sunburns is actually a result of the body sending blood to the area to help with the healing process. So that's very interesting. That redness is actually helping us recover from a sunburn. If you get sunburned often, your risk of skin cancer is higher. These are statistics that are commonly talked about, so I won't belabor the point, but the more often you get sunburned, the more damage you have, and what can happen is cells with damaged DNA from overexposure to UV rays can become problem cells and proliferate out of control, and this is what's called cancer. But on a very simple note, the mechanisms that cause a sunburn or damage to our cells comes down to moving electrons and chemical bonds. So I hope that everybody was able to follow that. Just researching this video helped me learn a lot about UV rays. The next step is learning how to protect yourself against the potentially harmful effects of UV light. So tune in to part 2 and 3 to learn more about sunscreen, antioxidants, and maybe what our options are. And check out the description for a really good white paper and a website to kind of explain some of these concepts that I discussed today. Thanks for watching.